became illegal tomorrow to be pro-life, would there be enough evidence to convict you?
The pro-life movement is still under attack.
A pro-life woman was arrested for the second time for silently praying near an abortion facility in the UK. Isabel Vaughan-Spruce told officers that she wasn't engaging in any illegal activities in the buffer zone near the Birmingham abortion business, but rather praying silently in her head.
Isabel Vaughan-Spruce is the leader of the 40 Days for Life campaign in Birmingham in the UK. Police arrested her and charged Isabel with violating a public space protection order and committing, quote, anti-social behaviour.
Before we ever got involved in March for Life, I was praying outside abortion centres, and I've been doing that for probably around 20 years. And we've had many, many women who have decided to continue their pregnancy because we've been able to offer them a reasonable alternative, whereas before they maybe felt they didn't really have any options. But last year, the local council and the local police got together to bring in what's called a PSPO, a public space protection order, which creates like a buffer zone around the abortion centre. A PSPO, it doesn't ban people, it bans behaviour. So that was made abundantly clear to them that I wasn't doing anything which was prohibited by the PSPO, and yet still, simply for my thoughts, I was arrested. People are trying to silence the pro-life voice.
Who would have thought that someone could be arrested for silently praying?
Isabel is kind of an example of a broader issue, which is the United Kingdom is just trying to ban 40 Days for Life.
When I was taken to the police station, I was asked there what I was praying for, what I was thinking about, and I told them that I'd been praying for people like my friend Amy, who was abused and became pregnant and was pressured into having an abortion. For people like my friend Natalia, who took abortion tablets and ended up passing her child at home alone. And she saw that child down the toilet, which has traumatized her for life. These are the people I've been praying for. I'm very pleased to say that I've been completely vindicated of any wrongdoing.
How did we get to the place where freedom of thought, which is an absolute right, is investigated and put on trial?
If we have laws that are saying prayer is an offence, then we must never ever believe that, and we must never feel intimidated by those laws. Particularly when we're talking about silent prayers, that is one of our most fundamental rights. As Christians or as people of goodwill, we must be prepared to stand firm and stand up for them.
Philadelphia, she's here all the way from England. Please help me welcome international pro-life hero Isabel Vaughan-Spruce to the stage.
Well, thank you for such an incredibly warm welcome. I have to say, I don't only feel honoured to be here, I feel absolutely humbled amongst so many incredible pro-life warriors. So thank you so much for inviting me here. In summer of 2022, I was at a pro-life youth conference in the UK talking to the young people there. And I said to them, if it became illegal tomorrow to be pro-life, would there be enough evidence to convict you? Well, those words came back to bite me within a few months, because it did become illegal in certain areas to even think pro-life thoughts. But to go back a little bit, I was brought up in a very pro-life family. My dad particularly was pro-life in every way. When I was young, we were living in a big house, a big 4-story house up on the hills, and there was a local psychiatric hospital that was closing down. It was called a psychiatric hospital, but it was more like a community that people with severe mental health problems lived in, people who had things like severe schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. And these people were being sent to live out in the community, and they simply couldn't cope. And my dad, who always had an eye for the underdog, opened up our house for these people to come and live with us. So us 6 children would share 1 bedroom, and many of these people, who my dad would always vet first, obviously, they would come and live with us, along with people who had just fallen into hard times and were living on the streets or just didn't have anywhere else to go. And some would live with us for weeks, some for years. But later on, when I would meet these people in our local town, they would tell me that these were the best years of their life. And I think it was so good for me growing up as well, because it taught me to appreciate people just for who they are, rather than for what they can or can't do. And this really helped form my pro-life beliefs in a very holistic way. But it wasn't until my teenage years that I really began to think about taking ownership of those pro-life beliefs myself. I used to love reading war stories. When I read the stories, you would see evil at its worst, but you would see humanity at its finest too. And as you do when you're reading a book or maybe watching a movie, I would ask myself the question, what would I have done if I'd lived back then? If I'd lived in those difficult times, would I have had the courage to do anything or to say anything? And I gradually realized I was asking the wrong question, because it wasn't so much of what would I have done back then, but what am I doing now? There is a battle going on. What am I doing about it? And I received even further motivation when I went on a pilgrimage to a place in Wales called Holywell, or St Winifred's Well. And if you ever come to the UK, I urge you to go there. It's an amazing place of pilgrimage. And when I went to this place, there was a little shop that sold religious items. And I was talking to a young man who was working there. And he told me how, when he was a teenager, he fell away from his faith. And he got in with a bad crowd. And one day they were out on their motorbikes together, and he had a terrible accident. And it left him with one leg that was completely shattered. He then had a permanent limp as a result of this, and he was in constant pain. He became very depressed, even to the point of considering suicide. And it was in that frame of mind that he went to bed one night, and he had a dream. And he said that he dreamt there was a plain of land in front of him, and across this plain of land, two armies marched towards each other. And he said one of the armies was led by a big angel who had a huge flaming sword. And he said, I automatically knew that this must be Michael, the archangel. And I said, well, which side of the battle were you on? And he said, well, I was just sitting on a rock reading a book. And he said St. Michael came out of the battle and stood in front of him and said, what are you doing? And he looked up at Michael and said, I'm just sitting here reading a book. And St. Michael said, can't you see there's a battle going on? Stand up and fight. And at that moment he woke up. His leg was completely cured. He had no pain. But more importantly, he realized he was being called back into the battle, and he took up his faith seriously again. And I realized that this was a call to me as well, that I couldn't live with my nose in a book. I couldn't be just thinking about other times or other places. And I began to look for a way to live out my pro-life beliefs. Initially, this would just be in financially contributing to other pro-life causes, to praying for the pro-life cause, but I wanted to do something active myself. And one day I picked up a magazine, I don't know if you have it in here in the US, called the Crusader magazine, originally started by St. Maximilian Kolbe. And I was just flicking through the page that had letters on it that had been sent in from people. And I read a letter that someone had written in about their experience praying outside an abortion center. And crucially, this lady had left a telephone number. So I got in contact, and she told me where the nearest place was where people prayed outside an abortion center. And this was in Birmingham, which was about an hour away from where I lived. So I went to join these people there. It was just a handful of people who would pray once a week on a Saturday morning. And I have to say, the first time there, it was quite a surreal experience. It was a beautiful, expensive residential area. They had huge houses that must have cost probably about $1 million for just one house. And I remember standing outside looking up at the abortion center, and one of the men there, he pointed out to me the window that you could see where the abortions actually took place. And he told me that 10,000 abortions every year would happen there. And it seemed so strange because outside, life just carried on as normal. But also, I just felt very much at peace. Now, clearly not with what was going on behind me, but I felt I was where God wanted me to be. And that movement, which was just initially, like I say, half a dozen people who would pray on a Saturday, we managed to really get it to grow, largely thanks to 40 Days for Life. I heard about 40 Days for Life and started a campaign in Birmingham. And more people came to join us, and we got much more structure and organisation to what we were doing. It was actually the first abortion centre that had ever opened in the UK. And yet in 2019, even though at that time it was the 4th busiest abortion centre in the country and still doing thousands of abortions every year, it was really a thriving business, if you can say that. On the 12th of December, Catholics will know that's the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, the manageress came out of the abortion centre with a bag of donuts to announce that it was going to be closing. All thanks to Our Lady. And interestingly, she went to give that news to one of our male volunteers, and she specifically spoke to him and told him that news. He had just celebrated his birthday 3 days previously on the feast of Juan Diego, a very important person in the story of Our Lady of Guadalupe. So I think it was very clear that God was the one who had his hand in this through our mother's intercession. So we moved to a new abortion centre, again in Birmingham, but it was a very different atmosphere for us. We were certainly not welcomed by many of the people there. Just to set the scene, it was a residential street, and we were very mindful of that. We actually had no posters at all. We would stand just in group of 2 or 3 people near the abortion centre and would just have some leaflets that would offer help and simply say to women, is there any help we can offer you, or would you like an alternative? And obviously some women did. And yet we were sworn at and spat at and threatened. We had our property stolen. Cars would drive down the street at high speed towards us and veer off at the last second. We were even physically assaulted. Sometimes we would capture these physical assaults on camera and take them to the police to ask them to intervene. And after doing this repeatedly, I asked the police why were they not doing anything about the fact that we were being physically assaulted. And the police officer I was talking to said to me, well, if you don't want to be assaulted, you don't have to come out of your house, do you? So you can see a little bit of what we were up against, and I'm sure that you've maybe had similar experiences in different ways here. The police did actually organise a meeting in that area to try and bring the community together a bit. We were invited, staff from the abortion centre were invited, some members from the local council who vehemently opposed us, they were invited, as well as some of the residents who lived in the community and opposed our presence. We went along to the meeting, me and 2 of my team members. Nobody else turned up, there was just the police officer. So they really weren't willing to engage at all, any of these people who opposed our presence. But they continued to put pressure on the council to bring in a buffer zone. And it was actually called a PSPO, a Public Space Protection Order. And this isn't a national law, this is something that's brought in at a local level. Originally, PSPOs were designed for things like dog fouling or drunken disorderly behaviour. So local councillors and local police forces could work together, maybe to stop dogs being brought into a local park, or to stop alcohol being drunk in a certain area if there was a problem. But they decided they wanted to use this local law to bring in a buffer zone around the abortion centre of about 150 metres all the way around it. But to do this, they had to go through a certain procedure, and part of the procedure was having an online consultation. So all this information was put online so that the locals could view it and see why this proposal was happening. And just to share with you a little bit of what went on in that online consultation. they talked about us, and they would say how we carried explicit signs saying, "Don't kill your baby." Now, not that I think there's anything wrong with carrying a sign that says that, but as I said, we didn't have any signs whatsoever, ever, outside that abortion centre, and we were the only people going there. So they were completely making up lies about us. It also said that since we'd come to the area, there'd been a 5% increase in antisocial behaviour and criminal behaviour. Well, that bit was true, but we were the victims. They didn't put that bit in there. They said how local residents' lives were affected. They were no longer able to enjoy their homes and gardens, and their mental health had been impacted. This was just by 2 people quietly praying on the street corner. There's a few quotes from this that I'll read that local residents had sent in, and this was put in the online consultation. One woman said, "I personally don't want to open my curtains and see these people for 80 days a year." That's 2 lots of 40 days for life. 80 days of having to stop myself from shouting at them. Well, it sounds like she maybe had a self-control problem. They chat in people's faces. I mean, would they rather us talk behind people's backs? By day, they wear bright clothing. By night, they lurk in groups. At weekends, they stand as families, even bringing children. This all causes me great upset. Horror of horror. I saw some children yesterday outside the abortion centre. I have to leave my curtains closed and not sit in my lounge. Why should I not be able to sit in my own lounge for 80 days a year? I've no idea. My children were none the wiser about this clinic before these protesters arrived. Well, I thought that was a very telling comment. Why was she bothered that her children were wiser about this healthcare facility? So people in the local area were asked to look at this online consultation. Then they were asked to answer some questions in a survey. And as you can maybe guess, they were very loaded questions. I'll read just a couple of them out to you. Do you think a PSPO and a buffer zone is the correct tool to tackle the behaviour of the protesters? So already assuming that there's behaviour that needs to be tackled. Is the proposed zone of the buffer zone large enough to protect service users? And there was just a box for yes or no. So you either say, yes, it's large enough, or no, which makes it look like you want it even larger. I mean, they may as well have asked, do you always beat your wife? So surprisingly, the PSPO was passed. And just to explain to you, a PSPO doesn't ban people, it bans certain behaviour. So it banned protesting from that area. It also banned displaying text or images relating to abortion, including the words abortion, soul, hell, baby, mum, and fetus. So if you had a car with the words baby on board and a sticker on the back, don't go into the buffer zone. Anyway, my volunteers, they moved further down the road outside the buffer zone, actually outside a Catholic church, which was right at the other end of the street, 150 metres away. Surprisingly enough, the locals still weren't happy. They started saying that they wanted the church to move. Shows you how intolerant they were. And it's also maybe an indicator of how Satan is never satisfied. You can't make a compromise with him. And they were still assaulting us and spitting at us and swearing at us. Anyway, it was in this atmosphere that I decided to go inside the buffer zone. I reasoned in my head, I don't protest outside abortion centres. I go there to pray and to offer help. I actually went inside when the abortion centre was closed, and I just stood a few metres away, just simply praying in my head. So I had no poster or leaflets. I wasn't even carrying rosary beads. I was just simply thinking towards God. Anyway, the police turned up quite quickly and asked me what I was doing. I told them that physically I was doing nothing. I was just standing there, but in my head I might be praying. Well, that was enough. They arrested me. They searched me very heavily. They went all through my hair. I don't know what they were expecting to find there. Maybe evidence of prayer. But they then took me to the police station and locked me in a cell for hours, and I was questioned at length under caution. Just to highlight how ridiculous this was, at one point when I was in custody, I was shown photographs of myself that one of the locals must have taken from their house. In one photograph, I had my hands in my pockets, another I had my hands crossed, another I was looking at my phone, and I was asked to identify myself in all these photographs, which I did. And I was then asked, were you praying in these photographs? Well, being honest, I had to say to them, I don't know. I said at some points I got distracted and thought about my sandwiches in the car. And looking at the photographs, I don't know whether I was praying or thinking about my sandwiches. So even I can't tell from looking at me whether I'm praying or not, let alone anyone else. Anyway, I was found, I was accused of being engaging in an act which was intimidating service users. I remind you, the abortion centre was closed. There were no service users. But to cut a long story short, I went to court and was acquitted in minutes. The prosecution actually offered nothing at all. They wouldn't say anything in court. So I reasoned, okay, everyone's understood now that I'm allowed to go there and silently pray. So 2 weeks later, I went and stood in exactly the same spot and did exactly the same thing, i.e. nothing. I just stood there praying. This time, 6 police officers showed up with a van, and they told me that my prayers were an offence. I reminded them that I was only praying internally and I had no intention of speaking to anyone. They said it didn't matter, my prayers were offensive, and I was rearrested. Again, I was taken to a police cell. I was released on bail, and eventually, after 6 months, they dropped the case. Even after that, the police continued to come out, as well as members of the council, giving me various tickets and telling me that I would be fined if I didn't move. I eventually had to make a claim for wrongful arrest, for false imprisonment, and for assault. I was awarded £13,000 in an out-of-court settlement, and it was only then that the police and the council stopped issuing fines. Yet recently, we saw another pro-lifer in the UK, Adam Smith-Connor, who has been fined for his silent prayers. He went to court because he wouldn't pay the fine, but sadly he was found guilty and he's now looking to appeal, so please do keep Adam in your prayers. My nation is becoming a laughing stock for the way it's treating its citizens. And I hope that doesn't sound unpatriotic. It's because I love my country that I'm calling it out on the terrible errors that it's making right now. We have looked over here to the US to learn from your successes. Whether that's the incredible pro-life marches that you have, the 40 Days for Life, which has been successfully exported to the UK, the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which gave us so much hope in the UK. And just as we have learnt from your successes, I hope that you can look to the UK and learn from our mistakes. Keep your faith at the forefront of all you do. Don't let the enemy tell you that you need to hide it. We have made that mistake. Encourage your young men to recognize their place in the pro-life movement. Don't let them feel that they have to have women speak for them on this issue. We have made that mistake. And always play to an audience of one, the only one who really matters, God. Don't ever worry about who else notices, who gets the credit, or who gets the praise. I'm well aware that I've come under the spotlight a little since I was arrested, but it hasn't made my work a jot more valuable in the eyes of God. So don't let there be any competition or jealousy that Satan can use to cause divisions. We have made that mistake. Just remember why we're in this fight. Because inside or outside the womb, every human being who has ever existed has been fashioned as an unrepeatable work of art, a one-off masterpiece by a divine creator who does not make mistakes. And just to end by going back to how I started this talk, when I said to the youth, if it becomes illegal tomorrow to be pro-life, will there be enough evidence to convict you? Well, if it ever becomes illegal here in Philadelphia to be pro-life, I really pray there'll be sufficient evidence to convict each and every one of you good people here. Thank you.